Hello and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this programme today we'll be discussing what does the re-election of President Obama mean, not only for Israel but also for the Middle East, and what will the next 4 years mean for the Middle East in terms of his foreign policy, towards his policies towards Israel, his policies towards the Arab Spring and his policies towards Iran. We'll also be discussing what impact will his re-election have on Israeli domestic policies, as Israel is about to embrace upon a general election in January, and will this affect the outcome of this general election in Israel? And to discuss these very important issues today, I'm joined by Philip Anthony Gardner, who's the editor of partyhardpolitics.com. Philip, welcome to the Middle East Report.
Thank you.
That's a pleasure. Philip, do you want to tell us a little bit about your background? I know you're telling me that you came from a Methodist background and that you took a position of being anti-Israel before, but you've changed your stance and your view. So I want to know how you got involved in politics, how Israel's very important, you're very passionate about Israel, the Jewish people, etc., and international politics.
Sure, absolutely. It's lovely to be here. When I first came to this issue, I didn't know very much about it, and I took the time eventually to learn about it through reading around the issue. Key books, Martin Gilbert's A History of Israel, and The Case for Palestine by Edward Said, and The Case for Israel by Alan Dershowitz. I read both sides, and I increasingly became supportive of Israel. And in the climate that we see, where so much effort is made to delegitimize Israel and Zionism, I felt it was very important that I stand up and speak about the values that I see in Israel that I admire so much, and the story of the Zionist enterprise, which is so admirable for a variety of reasons. And therefore that led me to become an activist for Zionist Federation, involved with the Israeli embassy here in the United Kingdom, and worked in the United States as well on that issue. And it's definitive for my life and for my politics. And I had the great pleasure of going to Israel for the first time 2 summers ago, and working in Jerusalem with Stand With Us. And it's been a great decision for me. It's brought me to many interesting places and talk about an issue that I love and is so interesting.
And how has it changed your worldview? Because once you go to Israel and you work in Israel, you work in the States, you tend to see that Israel's really at the center of almost everything.
Yes. It's fascinating. I had a fantastic professor in the United States who always spoke about how is it possible that this tiny little country, this inch on the map, could be so important. But when you're there, I think that it really strikes you about the place that Bethany is 5 minutes walk down the road from Jerusalem, and it's a short cab ride off to Nazareth or wherever else, and it's all so close together and so real, and the depth of feeling and the passion, and this city in this country that's been built out of the desert. It's an inspirational place, and I've always enjoyed traveling and international politics, and it was great to be there and to understand its importance. And I look forward to going back many, many times. I'm fortunate to count many Israelis as dear and close friends, and many American friends and Jewish friends around Europe and in the United States as well. So it was eye-opening, and you learn an awful lot in Israel in a very short amount of time.
Definitely. And also, I've also spent a lot of time in Washington, D.C., like you have, which is a very interesting place. You get to meet a few former sort of presidential advisors and various think tanks and organizations over there. What do you say your experience was in the States in terms of learning about the formation of American foreign policy towards the Middle East?
Yeah, well, I was very fortunate to spend some time at Georgetown University and to be taught directly by Elliot Abrams, who's a former Deputy National Security Advisor and Special Assistant for Foreign Affairs, and also to work at the Foreign Policy Initiative, which is a very important and up-and-coming think tank and group that tries to push the American political establishment to a very engaged attitude towards the outside world in general and the Middle East in particular. And my experience was very positive. I enjoyed myself very much. And you understand the importance of relationships. Relationships with Israel, experience of visiting the place, experience of traveling in the Middle East and Europe. And it's very important, you know, it's famously said in American elections that foreign policy doesn't play a big role. It certainly does for some people. You know, the last one, as I know we're going to talk about, was certainly dominated by the economy. But foreign policy matters a lot to key voters, and it does matter a lot in terms of American security, as we've tragically seen in the last 10 years or so. And so I felt that being in DC, it's a city of politics. That's all anyone wants to talk about, and it's very internationally minded. And I enjoyed that very much. I threw myself into that aspect of the city.
Excellent. On to the most important question, I think, of the programme really is asking you, what do you make of the re-election of President Obama for a second term?
I wasn't surprised by it. And President Obama has a strong political machine behind him. He's an extremely successful fundraiser. Personally, a quite popular president. A lot of Americans like him personally. And also I felt that the Republican alternative in Mitt Romney, the campaign never seemed to get off the ground. There was a small moment around the first debate where he seemed to be making headway. But I think that the lack of imagination in terms of campaigning from the Republicans were their undoing, and we saw that in the result. It was close, but not as close as most people thought it would be. I think it'll have real implications for American foreign policy. Obama's only real concern electorally now is the midterms in 2 years' time. And so I think you'll see, as he himself said to President Medvedev when he met with him a year ago, after the election, I'll have much more flexibility. And I fear that we'll see the first term of Obama in terms of foreign policy extended and kept to more thoroughly. We're going to have a lot of changes in terms of personnel in the national security staff and in the State Department. It'll be interesting to see how that affects the American foreign policy and the way that decisions are taken. But I think we're going to get more of the Obama-driven foreign policy rather than other members of the administration who at times have exerted themselves quite forcefully in the first 4 years. I think that will be undermined in the second.
So what can we expect in the next 4 years in terms of President Obama's next 4 years of his foreign policy outlook?
I would expect an attempt for closer relations with China, absolutely. I would expect a continuation of the daylight policy with Israel, which will have potentially very serious consequences. As for the Middle East, it's difficult to say what the Obama policy has been in the Middle East because there's been no coherence, no clear statement about values or, for that matter, a very pragmatic approach. It's been leading from behind and to some extent making it up as they go along. And I fear that that could take place again. And the problem with that is that the world in general, and particularly the Middle East, it really needs direction from the President of the United States. And President Obama doesn't seem to either believe that it should give direction, that the United States should give direction, or is incapable of coming up with a firm decision on what that direction should be. And as a result, people see weakness in the face of really growing threats and accommodation of groups I do not believe the United States or any free country such as Israel or the UK or NATO allies should be accommodating. We've seen that in Egypt, we're seeing that in the massacre in Syria and the rise of terrorist groups across the region.
We've got a clip to go to now that looks at President Obama's re-election victory.
Following a long and intensive presidential campaign, U.S. President Barack Obama was elected for a second term in office. In the midst of a tough economic situation and challenges both at home and abroad, about 120 million American voters ultimately chose the Democratic Obama over the Republican Mitt Romney.
President Obama being re-elected is dramatic, first of all, because the race was very close. For the most part, in the last 2 months or so, especially in the last month since the first presidential debate, President Obama and Mitt Romney have been neck and neck. In some cases, Governor Romney was even leading.
What were the American voters looking for in this election?
The American voters voted largely in support of a liberal ideology as far as various topics are concerned, but definitely as far as the economy is concerned. Obama had a huge incumbent advantage. In American politics, the incumbent, the person in office, both at the level of the presidency and at the level of members of Congress, has a huge advantage over his opponent. There are other variables that influenced the vote. For instance, the fact that Obama is a minority candidate. Demographic trends show it is immigrants or minority groups combined that form the majority of American society.
As opposed to previous elections, about $2 billion were spent on the 2012 U.S. election campaigns. And while Romney was indeed a challenging candidate, the American system of government is structured in such a way that the winner takes it all. Therefore, as far as the federal government is concerned, Mitt Romney is out of the game, at least for the next 2 years. And so in this specific period in history, when America seems to be facing grave issues, President Obama will be the one to continue addressing them for the next 4 years.
These are some challenging times for the U.S.
America as a nation today faces major challenges, both at home and abroad. So abroad, we're talking both about American involvement in Afghanistan still, the Arab Spring, potential, what might happen potentially with Iran, and also at the level of competition from China, from India, from Brazil and Russia. So these are challenges abroad. There are challenges at home. American economy is going through very hard times since the financial meltdown in 2008. So there is the fiscal crisis. There are issues with unemployment level, with growth. There is also a lot of issues beyond the economy. So we think about challenges related to immigration, challenges related to issues such as gay rights.
As second-term president, Obama may have an easier time executing reforms and decisions, given that the pressure of public opinion, which usually defines first-term presidency, is now no longer there. This applies to his foreign policy as well. Where Israel is concerned, some fear that the U.S. under Obama will pressure Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to outline his position on the borders of the future Palestinian state so as to advance the peace process with the Palestinians.
We're in election season as well for the next 2.5 months, and there's a chance that this election season would look different due to the results of the elections in the U.S. It seems that former Prime Minister Olmert has been waiting to hear what happens in the United States, and at least the pundits argued that he was waiting to see whether Romney is being elected, and then he would not run, assuming that the closeness or the friendship or the potential alliance between Romney and Netanyahu would not allow him to win the premiership. But now, given that President Obama was re-elected, I think there is a chance that he will consider seriously running for the premiership, which might change the electoral map considerably, at least based on the recent polls. The Prime Minister who will be elected will have to work with President Obama. If it is the current Prime Minister Netanyahu, then there might be some mending to take care of as far as the relationship between the two individuals is concerned. However, this is with the qualification that the relationship between the State of Israel and the United States have probably never been better.
Following the election, President Shimon Peres, along with other Israeli leaders, have congratulated Obama for his victory. And Prime Minister Netanyahu immediately held a meeting with U.S. Ambassador to Israel Dan Shapiro to discuss the results and the close strategic ties between the two nations. Shapiro noted the security cooperation with the Israeli government in Obama's first term and said he looked forward to such collaboration in the second term as well. For JN1, I'm Sivan Raviv, Israel.
Welcome back to the Middle East Report. Philip, we saw in that clip which the hostility really between the two leaders, between the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Obama. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu faces possibly another 4 years of President Obama and dealing with the United States. What direction do you believe that Obama will go in now that he doesn't have to worry about being elected? Will he impose a Palestinian state upon Israel and redefine Israel's borders?
I think it's difficult to know until we have the Israeli election. There's going to be a lot of change in the Obama White House and the Obama administration between now and Inauguration Day. There'll likely be new national security advisors, new Middle East advisors, certainly a new Secretary of State, maybe a new Secretary of Defense. And this is all going to take time. And from President Obama's point of view, the fact that once he's got that done, then there's the Israeli election, that'll help him take a breather. When he sees the results of the Israeli election, then the process of forming the new policy comes up, and it's all about who's been elected. And I think that's going to be a very interesting election to watch. We've got some fine candidates on different sides, and it's going to be very interesting. But I think the Obama foreign policy is going to be a reaction to the elections in Israel.
That's interesting. And what do you believe were the main issues that got President Obama re-elected in the United States?
I think, as identified in the report, to some extent incumbency is very important. Americans don't like to discard a president. They have done it before with Bush and Carter, but in general, it's tough to get rid of a president who's been elected and who's running election in the United States. I think Mitt Romney's campaign was relatively poorly run. The key problem being they focused on too many swing states. They tried to make themselves competitive in 8 or 9 states. If they'd concentrated on about half of them, they probably would have won, in my judgment. And so I think those were the key. Weakness of the challenger, incumbency advantage. As for whether that's a resounding mandate to then lead the country, it's another question. But Obama still has to juggle a divided Congress. The Republicans held the House. The Democrats held the Senate, but the Senate Democrats are a more conservative bunch than the president. And the House of Representatives, very powerful group. And as for 4 years, as soon as we're done with the next congressional set of elections in 2 years, this is the curse and the blessing of the American political system. It's all about the next election. So quicker than we think, President Obama will look increasingly irrelevant in favor of the next challenger, be it Democrat or Republican. But the small caveat to that, the most powerful time for a president of the United States, his 5th year. He's just been re-elected. He's just had his policies supported, at least in some way, by the electorate, and he doesn't have to worry about any immediate election. So the next year is going to be critical. That's why the Israeli election matters so much.
And why do you think that Mitt Romney, the Republican candidate for president, failed? Was it because of his Mormon beliefs and the failure to galvanize the conservative Christian support base in the United States?
If you look at the polls, it was a very interesting question. Could a member of the Church of Jesus Christ and Latter-day Saints get elected in the United States? I thought at the start probably not, on the basis that it's a religion that a lot of Americans feel a great deal of hostility towards. That said, Romney appears to have persuaded evangelical Christians to get out the vote, to donate in large numbers, and to act as activists, because although they are a significant proportion of the population, what's really impressive about the evangelical community in the United States is they get out the vote. They are prepared to get up very early in the morning, clear driveways of snow, take voters to the polls, all that kind of thing. And Romney made a lot of headway. Now, what helped him there was certainly a very close relationship with Israel. Romney was seen as being extremely pro-Israel. And also, he had a conservative position on most social issues, and one that chimed with a lot of evangelical Christians in the United States. His issue was more that he couldn't quite persuade leaning Republican people to come out and vote for him. And that's unfortunate, not entirely surprising against Obama, but he'll live to fight another day, certainly not as a presidential candidate, but I think Romney has a future in the Republican Party. He's undermined, really. The great irony is he had a great temperament, I thought. I admired his temperament. I thought it was suited for the presidency. But because he spent so much time in business, he's cautious. about major changes immediately. And that's probably a good thing in a president. It's not necessarily a good thing in a presidential candidate. He needed that moment to change the election, that dynamic, that decision to focus on Ohio or on Pennsylvania rather than 9 states at once. That would have helped him a lot, and he was too cautious for my liking and also for the American electorate, I think.
And where does the Republican Party go from here? Do they reinvent themselves? Do they look towards the Tea Party movement and have a more traditional grassroots support, or do they move more towards the centre and the centre-left?
It's hard for them. They took a hard beating in 2006 in the elections there. 2008, sweeping win for Obama. They made some comeback in 2010. But what you have to remember about midterm elections, so when just the Congress is up for election, the electorate is 10 years older and considerably more conservative, because without the draw of the presidential election, a lot of young people don't vote, a lot of minorities don't vote. So in terms of the 2010 midterms where the Tea Party did so well, there are key reasons for that. It would be a mistake for the Republican Party, I think, not to take account of what has happened. Mitt Romney didn't lose because he opposes gay marriage and he opposes abortion. These are small issues in this, or were small issues in this election. It's more, I think, issues to do certainly with immigration reform. If the Republicans need to become more reasonable in terms of immigration reform, and they could easily take advantage of this issue. The Democrats haven't shown a great appetite to come up with original or successful plans on this. So the Republicans, as George W. Bush used to speak about, could really create a big majority in the Latino population, overwhelmingly church-going, overwhelmingly socially conservative. Their problem is they feel that the Republicans occasionally pander to anti-immigrant sentiments, and that's not something they're comfortable with. So I think the Republicans need to take a minute. They need to not feel they need to find the next candidate tomorrow. And they've got to have a real conversation about whether candidates like Rick Santorum or Newt Gingrich are who you want to be leading your party, or some of the great candidates they have, Senator Mark Rubio, potentially leading candidate. A lot of interesting candidates are around, but they need to take some time. The mistake of opposition is to think that the next election's tomorrow. It's not. You've got to take time to rebuild the party.
Let's go to a clip now. This clip is looking at President Obama's last 4 years in office, and particularly his relationship to the Arab world.
The relationship between the United States and Israel has been fraught with tension for the past 3 years, as Barack Hussein Obama has set America on an unprecedented path of outreach to the Islamic world. From his infamous Holy Quran speech in Cairo shortly after assuming office,
as the Holy Quran tells us, be conscious of God and speak always the truth,
to his controversial bow to King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia, and onward to his call for Israel to return to the dangerous pre-1967 borders and his contacts with the Muslim Brotherhood and the Taliban, this president has single-handedly set back the pivotal United States-Israel relationship to its lowest point ever. David Rubin, author, political analyst, and former mayor of Shiloh, Israel, is saying what most Israeli politicians are, perhaps understandably, afraid to say, that Obama is the most anti-Israel president since Israel's reestablishment 63 years ago. David Rubin charges that by refusing to say what most Israelis know to be true, even Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is actually helping Obama's 2012 election campaign.
Assalamu alaikum. Many other Americans have Muslims in their families or have lived in a Muslim-majority country. I know because I am one of them. But my father came from a Kenyan family that includes generations of Muslims. As a boy, I spent several years in Indonesia and heard the call of the azan at the break of dawn. I have known Islam on 3 continents.
Rubin points to surveys of Israelis in which only 4 to 15% consider Obama to be pro-Israel. And David Rubin says, quote, the re-election of Barack Obama, who, by the way, has not once visited Israel since his election, would be a proposed death sentence for a strong Israeli-American relationship. He goes on to say, due to the concerns of Democratic strategists and members of Congress who are fearful of losing the formidable Jewish voter and donor base in their party, Obama has discernibly reduced the pressure on Israel in recent days. But if he wins in 2012, watch out. David Rubin says there will be no strings holding him back, and the real socialist, Islamic-influenced, Jeremiah Wright-influenced Barack Hussein Obama will emerge from the moderate image closet in all of his glory. Now that is one scary thought.
Hello and welcome back to the Middle East Report. Philip, we saw in that clip there really identified some of the key policies outlaid by President Obama during the last 4 years in office. In terms of his foreign policy towards Israel and the Middle East, I can only consider it to be a failure and also incredibly dangerous. I mean, we saw his lack of failure to support the Green Movement in Iran in 2009 when ordinary students took to the streets to fight against the rigging of the election, which brought Ahmadinejad back to power. His silence there for 3 or 4 weeks on that issue. We've seen the deposement of Ben Ali, the leader of Tunisia, and President Mubarak of Egypt, and allowed the Arab Spring to emerge, which has brought the Muslim Brotherhood to power. He's had President Obama has key members of the Muslim Brotherhood in his own government. We also know that he's really made steps to actually negotiate with the Muslim Brotherhood and others. Surely the next 4 years are going to be very, very critical for not only the future of Israel, but also the future of the Middle East in terms of moderation.
Yeah, I think I certainly agree with a lot of that. The problem with the Obama policy in the Middle East, this goes for Israel, this goes for his treatment of Arab countries, is there's no backbone to it and there's no principle to it. Obama intervenes in Libya belatedly on the basis that he wants to protect civilians and promote equal rights, and says nothing about the massacres in Bahrain, does nothing about the ongoing massacre in Syria, or the grotesque methods used in Saudi Arabia to control Shia minority populations. So where does this president stand? What does he believe in? He doesn't have a problem with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, an organization from which Hamas, a terrorist group, is a descendant, if not a brother. A lot of Arab countries feels he abandoned close American allies. The question of whether whether or not he could support Mubarak seems to me moot compared to what comes next. And America gives lots of money in aid to Egypt, for example, and is not doing enough to make sure that Egypt understands where its role lies in the region. Egypt is a pivotal country. It has a peace treaty with Israel. That peace is a cold peace that needs to be made warm. We need normalization of those relationships. And as long as we have a Hamas pandering president of Egypt, that seems to me unlikely. You saw the storming of the Israeli embassy in Cairo a few months ago. That's going to happen more and more. Greater threats, greater incitement, unless there are clear red lines that the president sets. These are the values that we require of countries. And I would like to see a much more principled stand from the president.
And when it comes down to Egypt, I mean, Egypt is and always has been the leader of the Arab world.
Yeah.
And here we've seen the rise of the Muslim Brotherhood come to power through President Morsi winning the presidential elections. We've seen there almost the mainstream media turning a blind eye to the clampdown on human rights, the clampdown on freedom of press and freedom of media in Egypt, which means it's only going to be a more dangerous place for tourists and others. And we're seeing this empowerment of the Muslim Brotherhood. And there's even talks just after the election that President Obama wants to create a big reform package in which he normalizes relationships with the Muslim Brotherhood and even Iran.
Yeah, I think there's danger of all of that. And what is happening in Egypt is really quite concerning. There's the NGO activists who are rounded up and charged with ridiculous crimes of espionage and whatever else the Muslim Brotherhood could think to charge. And it is unbelievable that an American president is not saying this will not do. Basically, what they did was they rounded up all the NGO activists they could find. They've let go a lot of the Americans, so it's no longer front page news. But as for the Egyptians who are hoping to create a free, tolerant, democratic Egypt, which is a long way from being the case today, they're forgotten. And it's absolutely unacceptable for the president to take this position. And further to that, if there's no clear leadership, then we have a president who is elected in Egypt. 48% of people voted in Egypt. He won by a hair's breadth. So we're talking about a quarter of the population, the people, the foot soldiers of the Muslim Brotherhood, who are going to perpetrate an extremist takeover of what is, at least in parts, a relatively secular, in some parts Christian-minded society that does genuinely, I believe, want to see progress. But there's that extremist element that isn't being controlled, it's not being marshaled. And I certainly think we'll see closer ties between Egypt and the United States under President Obama because of Egypt's strategic importance. I think negotiations with Iran might well lead to closer recognition. The United States already has been engaging in shuttle diplomacy with the Iranians. It's going to be quite worrying. Obama has not shown himself willing to take strong action against Iran. This is Israel's #1 strategic fear in the region, is the threat of a nuclear Iran. And it's not just to Israel. It's absolutely to Europe. It's absolutely to the United States. A nuclear Iran will cast a shadow across the whole of the Middle East. And where is President Obama on this issue? He's nowhere to be found. And in the time that we get a new Secretary of State, the time for them to get into the job and to take action, I fear the vacuum. I think the vacuum is very, very dangerous for all people concerned in the Middle East.
Which makes it more and more likely that we're going to see possibly Israeli airstrikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, knowing that Israel would need American support and backing. We've seen the re-election of President Obama. We've seen that personal hostility between him and the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, which certainly means that in terms of taking out Iran's nuclear weapons, Israel's going to have to do it alone. I can't see America in any way backing or supporting Israel on this.
I fear that's right. I find it hard to believe that President Obama will openly support the Israelis in this. And I do think it's probably coming. I don't think you can negotiate with people like Ahmadinejad who want to wipe Israel off the map, people who deny the Holocaust. These people are extremist. Their views are not only anti-Israel but anti-Western. They have no respect for human rights. You alluded to the terrible violence they used against their own people during the attempts to secure a democratic future for Iran. And Israel, every day that goes past that Iran gets closer to nuclear weapons capability and the capacity to destroy the Israelis, the more Israel has to think about taking those steps.
And also that puts Israel in a very, very difficult position because no one wants war, but the implications of Iran developing nuclear weapons would change the entire Middle East, lead to a proliferation of nuclear weapons in the region, but also enhance the prospects of nuclear weapons getting in the hands of Islamist terrorist organizations such as Al-Qaeda or Hezbollah that could carry out dirty bombs attacks on New York or London or Paris or Madrid, anywhere else in the world. So therefore, it's absolutely essential, isn't it, for the national security of the Middle East, for Europe and the United States to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. So why is the Obama administration trying to open diplomatic relations? As the news came out this week that in 2009, President Obama was seeking to normalize full relationships with Iran.
Yeah, you're exactly right. The problem when it comes to the Middle East is not enough Europeans or Americans, for that matter, understand that the national security concerns Israel has today are ours tomorrow. And the difference is Israel's in the neighborhood. They're dealing with these issues. Why President Obama thinks that he can talk religious fundamentalists who are bent on violence out of it, I don't really know. Iran is the #1 supporter of terror worldwide. They support Hezbollah. They're supporting that with their own troops, the putting down of the uprising in Syria, massacring of innocent people in Syria. And Hezbollah is a serious non-state actor, probably the #1 non-state actor in the world in terms of terrorism. They've attacked Israel before. They'll do it again. They've perpetrated attacks in Europe. We saw the bombing in Bulgaria. This is a really, really dangerous situation. Right now, the world needs absolutely strength and peace through strength from the Israelis, from European allies, from the United States. President Obama does not show the leadership needed on Iran. He's extremely weak on the Iranian issue.
I also want to discuss something that is very much linked to that, and that was the attack on the 11th of September 2012 on the US consulate in Benghazi, which resulted in the death of, Christopher Stevens, the American ambassador, being murdered. 3 other American diplomats were also killed in that, and now that General Petraeus, the director of the CIA, has actually resigned because has an actual marital affair. Is there a big cover-up that the White House is doing in terms of what really went on in Benghazi?
I think the events in Benghazi were tragic. This was an ambassador who, by all accounts, worked hard, was popular largely within Libyan society, and all diplomats have the absolute right to safety and security in the work they do, and for him to be murdered in this way is horrific. And the result from the Obama administration was silence. This person's at fault, that person's at fault, and you again, it comes down to leadership. Now, cover up, I'm not sure. I think the reality is probably not enough care was taken in relation to intelligence that came in. The 11th of September, tragically, will forever now be a serious day where we're scared about potential other attacks, copycat killings. And beefing up security, to me, at airports, at embassies, would seem to be the immediate reaction you'd have. General Petraeus stepping down, I think there's more to that than meets the eye. I don't know why it's happening, and I think it'll be the subject of an interesting book or two. But I doubt that is related to the killings in Benghazi, but there's certainly more to come out about Benghazi. Why was no more security sent? This is a vulnerable embassy in the Arab world where there are violent extremists operating, as has been stated repeatedly by the United States government, among others. And yet no increased security, no protection for an ambassador who's there fulfilling his duty. Is it a protest? Is it about this film that came out, the innocence of Muslims, that became such a serious problem, apparently, in the Arab world? Of course not. This is about calling terror, and taking a serious stand against violence, especially when directed against diplomatic missions.
And surely that undermines America's credibility, because if America's power is not backed up by strength, then no one takes America seriously, certainly don't take her foreign policy seriously, and makes America more vulnerable for more attacks like we saw in the US consulate in Benghazi.
Absolutely. Perfect example is take Libya itself. Libya was pursuing weapons of mass destruction. They saw how serious the Bush administration was about stopping that. They stopped. Syria used to be pursuing weapons of mass destruction. The Israelis took it out. They haven't done so again. They haven't attempted to go nuclear again. Force shouldn't be the first resort. Of course not. We should always seek to peacefully resolve issues where possible. But you have to keep the sword handy for when negotiations fail, because sometimes it's the only way to make people understand what you're standing for, what are your red lines. And that's what everyone wants to know. They want to know what are the limits that the United States will not tolerate you going past, what Israel won't tolerate you going past. Everyone knows that about Israel. There's a price to be paid for attacking the Israelis. Where's the price that Al-Qaeda and the other terrorist groups are paying, or Iran for that matter, for the attack in Benghazi or other attacks against US interests abroad?
And when it comes down to what's the implication really for President Obama's re-election on Israeli domestic policy, in particular domestic politics, as Israel is embracing ourselves for a general election this January, in which the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has formed an alliance with Israel Beitenu?
Yeah, it'll be very interesting. I think Netanyahu has personally politically painted himself into a bit of a corner, because more than any Israeli prime minister I can think of, he seemed to favor a candidate in the American elections in Mitt Romney. And of course, we've got more Obama. And I think that at that point, after that happened, Netanyahu realized his only chance at this next election is to solidify the right in Israel, united under one banner. And that's why we've seen him make a deal with Israel Beitenu and Avigdor Lieberman, their leader, the current foreign minister. I think it'll certainly play a big part. I know that the left in Israel are going to use this. They're going to say, you have damaged our relationship with the United States, our most important alliance, to Netanyahu. It's early to make predictions. It's difficult to see who's going to be running on a Kadima ticket and how well Labour will do under Yachimovich. It's going to be a close election. Personally, I would be surprised to see a right-wing coalition emerge out of it. I very much expect the centre-left to win this election. I think Netanyahu's done himself a lot of damage.
Interesting. We've got a clip to go to now. It's called the new Netanyahu-Lieberman joint ticket.
Israeli politics have taken a turn with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's announcement of a joint slate consisting of the Likud party he chairs and the Israel Beitenu party that Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman heads. The merge came as a surprise only a few months ahead of the expected Israeli elections coming up this January 2013. The newly formed joint list for the elections has been titled Likud Beitenu.
The goal of the joint effort is clearly to create, for the first time in many years in Israel, a strong central party which will have over 40 members of the Knesset, which will be by far the largest party in the Knesset and much larger than any other parties. It'll then be clear that this party will be the basis for the establishment of a government and be able then to rule for 4 years as a government, not dependent on a large number of small sectorial parties, which can each one raise various demands, which makes it almost impossible to run a serious government.
The merger, which was the talk of the week in Israel's political realm, was approved by the vast majority of the Likud Central Committee on Monday night. Netanyahu expressed certainty that this initiative will bring his party and the right-wing faction much closer to victory in January's elections. But he also noted that it will serve as a first step towards changing the Israeli system of government, which has been the topic of discussion for quite some time now.
I think it's a very positive development, specifically in the case of Netanyahu and Lieberman, but also as a general development in our political landscape. I think that this unification will add to stability and the ability to govern in a more effective and efficient manner.
Netanyahu and Lieberman's work and collaboration dates back to the 1990s, when Lieberman served as the Director General of the Prime Minister's office during Netanyahu's first term as Prime Minister. Lieberman then formed his own Israel Beitenu party, which initially appealed to many Israeli voters from the former Soviet Union. And though he is often viewed as a hawkish figure and extreme rightist politician, some people claim this is just a facade.
The claim that Mr. Lieberman is much more extreme than the Likud, in my opinion, is incorrect. You have members of the Likud, I don't want to mention their names now, but they're known, members of Knesset in the Likud, in my opinion, who are more right and more extreme than Mr. Lieberman, certainly a member of his parties. There are issues that he's more extreme in, there are issues that he's more pragmatic in.
Lieberman, he looks like a bear, but he's actually can be very intellectual. When he says something, he learned this, he make homework before he open his mouth. Actually, I didn't know who to vote this year. If he would stay in Israel Beitenu, I would vote for him. So this combination together, I like it.
However, some Israelis fear that the menage of Lieberman and Netanyahu running together for the next government is a recipe for trouble, since they feel that little progress has been made with the two thus far as acting Prime Minister and Foreign Minister in this current government.
I think the coalition between Bibi and Lieberman is it's very sad and it's a nightmare, and I'm worried. What is the future? What's about the peace? There is no peace process. There is nothing. Nobody talk about peace anymore. Nobody talk about the future for the children.
And so the question on the streets of Israel remains, who does this political move benefit?
Mr. Netanyahu, Mr. Lieberman say it serves the interests of the country. It serves the interests of Israel. It serves the interests of the nation because we are suffering from what we call a lack of governability. We don't have an ability to have a strong government. We want a strong government. We want a strong prime minister that not every day someone can threaten him, I'm going to leave your coalition and make a government with someone else. If he has 45, 50 mandates, he won't be able to do it. Many people say it serves the interests of Mr. Netanyahu because it will guarantee that he will be called upon the president to form the next government because he'll have the largest party for sure, and that this guarantees that in the next 4 years he will be prime minister.
Moreover, Netanyahu dismissed the rumors of Lieberman potentially serving as his successor in the future, saying he intends on leading Israel for many more years. For JN1, I'm Sivan Raviv, Israel.
Hello and welcome back to the Middle East Report. Philip, do you believe that by Netanyahu, the leader of the Likud, entering into alliance with Israel Bentenu party, that actually will consolidate his position on Israeli domestic politics?
I don't. I think that while the Likud, a lot of people are able, though they might not agree with everything Likud says and does, to grin and bear it and vote for Netanyahu and Likud because they are seen as people who can get things done and who are serious and who won't compromise when it comes to Israel's security. I think a lot of people who go through that thought process to vote for Likud can't do it for Israel Beitenu or Avigdor Lieberman on the basis that he speaks his mind a little bit too much. He can be very abrasive. He has opinions in terms of internal domestic politics that a lot of people find very troublesome. And the problem with the thinking that they might well be the largest party elected, but the largest party elected in the current Knesset, Kadima, are not a part of the government. It's about who can you form an agreement with. Now, let's say Likud Beitenu can get 45 members. Where do they get the other 15? They either have to go to, again, the ultra-Orthodox religious parties and therefore not at all address the problems with the current government, or they have to get a group like Kadima or Labour or one of the newer parties to agree with them. And those parties are put off by Lieberman and by Yisrael Beitenu members. So I think it's a very good way of getting about 40% of the vote. It's not going to deliver a majority, in my opinion, but Israeli elections and Israeli politics are nothing if not surprising, so I might well be wrong.
Absolutely. We're down to the last 5 minutes of the programme now, Philip. What do you believe are the key issues that are going to be at the core of Benjamin Netanyahu's re-election campaign?
It's going to be about security and largely a campaign of better the devil you know than the devil you don't. And Yakimovich, who's the leader of the Labour and probably a very popular candidate on social domestic issues, doesn't seem to speak about security very much. And security is, of course, issue number one in Israel. So I think security will play a big role. But if the left mollifies that, then Netanyahu can point to a strong handling of the economy and of a very laissez-faire economic attitude, but some strong social programs. So he has a record to fall back on apart from security. But security is always going to dominate Israeli politics, in my opinion.
And how much will Iran feature in this up-and-coming general election in Israel?
I think Iran will certainly feature, particularly because Avigdor Lieberman this is his issue number 1, 2, and 3. So I think Iran will play a big role, and I think the left will try and characterize Iran certainly as a concern. There's a strong bipartisan support for doing things on Iran, but I still think the left will say the fundamental issue is always going to be the Palestinians. If we make a deal there, then opposition from Iran and outside groups can be dealt with in a different way. But I do think Iran will play an important role. But I'm not sure Netanyahu will get that much mileage out of it on the basis that he hasn't done enough already, really.
And just supposing that Benjamin Netanyahu is re-elected, forms a new government, as we know it's made up of so many different parties, a coalition government, how then will his attitude be towards a newly elected President Obama in the United States?
Well, it'll be very interesting because what we will have is an American electorate that has, to some extent, shrugged and reaffirmed Obama. And if Netanyahu wins, then that's a real reaffirmation of support for him personally, because the nature of the party they will be voting for has changed dramatically by including Israel Betenu. So I think Netanyahu, who's the leading figure of Israeli politics, will be confident, as he always is. He'll be brash. And I think that every day that goes past, he'll feel safer in saying Israel can do this on its own in terms of surviving in the region. It would love, of course, a close relationship with the United States. But I think if Obama gets too aggressive, pushes too hard, Netanyahu won't be pushed around on this issue. So I think Netanyahu will be able to stand up for himself and feel quite comfortable doing it if he is re-elected.
And in the coming months, and certainly in the coming years, particularly with President Obama's re-election, do you think his position will get closer to that of Europe, and we're going to see far more hostility towards Israel? You've got less than a minute to answer that question, I'm sorry.
I doubt it. I think he will at first try that. I think it won't work because I think Israel and forces within the US will stand up to it, and I think he will track back to not really doing very much, which isn't good for the Middle East in general, but I think it's probably the best we can hope for from President Obama.
Philip, I just want to thank you so much for being my guest today on the Middle East Report, and thank you for all the insights that you bring in terms of American politics and understanding of the Middle East.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for watching today's Middle East Report. We've seen through this program today that President Obama has been re-elected for another 4 years in office. Certainly if his last 4 years are to go by, then we can expect that Israel will be more internationally isolated. We'll see that Israel's enemies across North Africa and the Arab world will rise to positions of power and dominance in the Middle East. We'll also see the empowerment of Iran and the increasing international isolation of Israel. And this is where, as Christians, we need to stand stronger with Israel and the Jewish people as they face a time and a period of crisis. It's important that we stand up and we speak up for Israel and the Jewish people in what is considered an unprecedented political environment now that President Obama has been re-elected. And we've got a song to go to now that pays tribute to the strong American-Israel alliance that's based upon shared mutual values, and in particular our Judean Christian heritage. And it's important that Christians this side of the Atlantic and in the United States speak up for Israel and the Jewish people to ensure that President Obama does not impose a false and dangerous peace upon Israel and the Jewish people.
I don't care about the 6-day war. I don't care what they were fighting for. All I know is there's a flood of hate that rages just outside their gate. And the storm, we see it's growing strong. Both sides say it won't be long. I can't sit idly by, come stand with me. Join the better brotherhood, come stand with me. I can't sit idly by, come stand with me. Join the better brotherhood, come stand with me. Children indoctrinated from the earliest age is the greatest evil that I've ever seen. Cartoons teaching that the Jews aren't human. This brainwashing is straight from hell. This isn't about borders or settlements, it's about the right to live. I don't care why you hate them, they have a right to be. I wasn't alive during the Third Reich, but I'm here now, and so are you. Please don't sit idly by, come stand with me. Join the better brotherhood, be who you're supposed to be. We're Christians, Muslims, and Jews, all descendants of Abraham, and we're better than this. We're better than this. Meet me down at the Temple Mount. Come stand with me. Please stand with courage. Come stand with me. Please stand with courage. Come stand